Chat. Chatters. Are chatters? Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational and entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a question or concern, please go see a licensed professional. Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Hope y'all are doing well. Let's run through a couple of announcements. I don't think we really have much. Kind of doing a regular stream schedule. Guide comes out on the 26th. I think we're on track for that release date. So thank you to everyone who's already ordered. And if y'all are interested in motivation and understanding ADHD, specifically around, we do sort of go through some clinical understanding, almost like what I would teach to medical students, like how can we sort of clinically understand what ADHD is. But there's a lot of non-clinical stuff too. So there's also a lot of stuff that I share with patients of mine or people like, family members, friends, things like that, who want to understand ADHD from a more non-clinical perspective. So for example, like discretely learning organization or prioritization skills can actually really help people with ADHD. It doesn't necessarily directly treat the disease, but what it does do is put up guardrails around how the disease interferes with your function. So there's all those kinds of tips and tools and tricks in there. We also talk a lot about motivation and attention and understanding like where thoughts come from. So this is the biggest guide that we've released so far. I think it's basically like, I want to say it's like 40 or 50 videos or something. Like, I'm not sure exactly on the size, but it's the largest guide that we've released so far. And it also goes into a lot about like the fundamentals of what meditation teaches us. Like, when people say meditation teaches us, how to be better people. And like, since I meditate, I'm focusing more and I'm accomplishing more and things like that. We hear all these success stories around meditation, but we're not really sure how. So the guide really digs into a lot of the details of how thoughts, like where thoughts come from, and the relationship between thoughts and actions, and how to cultivate the right kinds of thoughts, and therefore cultivate the right kinds of actions. It's not released. It's coming out in 12 days. So check it out. Anything about pricing and discounts and stuff like that, I have no clue. It's above my pay grade. I just make the stuff. Yeah, so hopefully it'll be good. Give us your feedback, please, please, please. We really appreciate it. This guide was made possible actually because of the feedback that people have given us in the past in terms of like what y'all are looking for. So whether you like it, don't like it, if it's helpful, like please, please let us know. And yeah. Today we're going to be talking about so someone's asking about reactive attachment disorder, differences between that and autism, and can someone have both? Psych Breezy, someone is highly educated in this stuff. So we're going to start way simpler than that, Psych Breezy. We're going to talk about the basics of attachment. So we're going to sort of share some stuff about attachment theory, and then we're going to talk a little bit about virginity and shame. The other thing is that people have been requesting hints about our current community challenge, which is connect the dots. So we will be sharing a hint with you, and maybe we'll be sort of making it useful as well for people who are not participating. But for those of you that don't know, we've done a couple of really awesome community events over the last couple of months. Our Touch Grass Challenge was one of the most, if not the most successful community event we've done. So people went out in our community and took pictures of stuff and did things like they touched grass, they went swimming, they picked fruit, they meditated with people, they meditated in the park. So people are getting out there and doing things. So we decided to amp up the difficulty a little bit because y'all have been crushing the previous challenges. And so Connect the Dots is kind of like a global community scavenger hunt. And that's ongoing, and people have been asking me for hints, so I think we're going to be dropping a hint somewhere today, probably towards the end. Okay? I'm Nicholas20, first time joining Dr. K Twitch stream. Welcome. I'm Nicholas20. Hopefully it'll be worth your while for attending. We appreciate it, my friend. Oh, okay, we dropped it already today. Go on Discord, they got it. All right. Konzit, so like an ARG? Absolutely. Whoopsie. Whoopsie-daisy. Whoopsie-daisy. Ah, that 3 is an E. Is this regarding Bowlby attachment theory? Sort of. So we're going to talk a little bit about Bowlby, Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, etc. Okay. So what kind of attachment are we talking about? Man, y'all know so much about attachment. This is so great. Okay, so let's talk about attachment. Okay, so oh no, fluorescent pickle is debating me. Whoopsa daisy D's. Go ahead. Loaded 0451. My attachment style is USB-C. The modern attachment style. Attachment styles for the digital generation. USB-C. There it is. RUC1, RUC1. All right. Long day, man. A long day. We're doing more of a lecture style today. Timber Time 11 is asking, is there any scientific insight explanation to some of the occult aspects of certain meditation techniques? For example, during Namaste expansion, I feel there are some strong repulsive magnetic forces emanating from my hands. Feeling the third eye, overall breathing. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, anyway, we're not going to get distracted. We're going to do attachment theory, but all wonderful questions. I think this is where a lot of the quantum mysticism BS kind of comes in, because people have tried to posit scientific explanations for weird experiences in meditation. I think there's a lot of face validity to that stuff, right? So, for example, like people will say things like, you know, the universe exists as a probability waveform, and the act of observation will cause that to collapse into a reality, like Schrodinger's cat kind of stuff. And so people will sort of extrapolate that into consciousness has creative power. When I've talked to actual physicists about that stuff, they say that that's all BS. I'm not really sure. I do think from a neuroscience perspective, we've got some pretty interesting, scientific explanations for a lot of this stuff. One of the best explanations for this is phantom limb. So phantom limb is a situation where we can experience sensations in places that don't exist. So we know that that's biologically possible. So when I experience an expansion of consciousness, right, there could be a mechanism to feel things outside of my body, if that makes sense. Matrix Y was saying, my attachment style is like Apple, difficult to connect and always changing the rules. That's so good. My wife and I constantly have debates about Android versus Apple. All right. So let's talk today a little bit about attachment. So we're going to start like super, super basic in terms of explaining where attachment theory comes from and some sort of synthesis or kind of boiling down to the essence of a lot of what we've learned about attachment. So the first thing to understand is that attachment theory actually came out of the work of someone named Bowlby, and then later on, someone named Mary Ainsworth did a very interesting experiment where she looked at basically infants and the way that they, or toddlers, and the way that they related to their mothers. And something kind of interesting happened as people were sort of looking at the way that we form relationships as adults and as children. Psychologists started to make observations that the relationships that we form in childhood will sort of dictate or sort of prophesize the kinds of relationships we form as adults. So one of the things that we're going to start with is sort of a very, very classic attachment experiment, which will explain a lot of what we're going to be dealing with, which is the strange situation experiment by Mary Ainsworth back in the 70s. So what Ainsworth and her colleagues did is they took a parent, they took the kid of the parent, and then they put them in a room that had some toys. And then they sort of created a standard situation where the parent leaves the room. So remember that this room is relatively unfamiliar. After a little, they'll observe what the child does when the child is alone in the room, and then a stranger actually enters the room, and they'll see how the child reacts to the stranger. The last thing that'll then happen is that the parent returns to the room, and they observe what the child does when the parent comes back. And what they observed was actually a very wide array of different behaviors from the child, and they were really, really fascinated by that. So for example, some kids, when the parent walks in the room, will kind of completely ignore the parent, will go and play with various things. Other kids will start by staying close to the parent and then sort of like, leave home base to like go grab a toy, and they'll kind of come back. Other kids will not even leave parent at all and will sort of stay very, very clingy with the parent. And then when the parent leaves the room, they notice that there were a lot of different behaviors. So some kids would be kind of okay for a little while, and then as time goes on, get increasingly distressed. Some parents really wouldn't care when the parent comes back. Other kids would sort of, start by immediately becoming distressed. The second that they notice that parent is leaving the room, they'd start to become really distressed, start crying, wants parents to stay. And so they observed a lot of different reactions in terms of when parents leave the room. And then they also noticed a similar set of reactions when a stranger enters the room. Some kids are actually will completely ignore the stranger, will be completely chill in the presence of the stranger. Other kids will start to panic as soon as a stranger enters the room. Other kids will be kind of wary. And the longer that time goes by, they'll start to panic more and more and more. So once again, we saw a lot of different reactions by the kids. And the last thing, and this is what was really interesting, and I think the most interesting part of the experiment, is when parent actually returns to the room, the kids actually responded very, very differently. So some kids were inconsolable. No matter, they'd started crying when the stranger was in the room, and when mom or dad comes back in, I think maybe they did it all with mothers, actually, now that I think about the experiment. But they would be very, very hard to kind of console or quiet down. Other kids would quickly calm down. So, okay, now that mom is back in the room, everything is safe, I can go back to playing toys. And they were sort of pretty chill if mom was in the room. Other kids would ignore all of the above, right? So they didn't care when mom left. They didn't care when the stranger enters the room. They don't care when mom comes back. And the most interesting, in my opinion, were the kids that actually got angry at mom. So originally what they would do is they'd run to mom for safety and comfort. They would be crying. They'd kind of calm down. But then as they started to calm down, they started to do slightly weird things. Like if mom tried to engage with them, they would reject mom. They would sometimes even hit mom, or sort of become kind of violent or angry. And so what Ainsworth and later sort of psychologists who sort of focused on attachment theory basically realized is that there are a lot of different ways that human beings treat relationships. And what kind of came out of this is this idea of attachment theory, which is sort of the theory of how human beings relate to each other, form connections, maintain relationships, and even how they handle perceived separations. So fears of abandonment, breakups, even things like grief and loss, those are all kind of governed by attachment theory. And the big thing that they sort of discovered is that our intimate relationships early on in life basically teach us the pattern of how we're going to relate to other human beings later in life. So one thing that's kind of confusing about this is that attachment theory doesn't really govern how sociable you are or whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. And some people may kind of hypothesize that, okay, I have trouble with people. Does that mean that I have an attachment problem, or what's the connection there? But the key thing about attachment theory is that this doesn't govern sort of arm's length relationships. This doesn't necessarily govern, people, work colleagues, kind of distant friends, acquaintances, things like that. A lot of these attachment dynamics really start to manifest as a relationship becomes close and intimate. So I've worked with a lot of people, for example, who are very, very social, very charismatic, very extroverted or introverted. And they actually do totally fine talking to people, hanging out with people, things like that. But when it enters into a romantic relationship or some kind of close relationship, all kinds of weird things start to happen. They start to get pretty anxious. They start to become distant. They start to become cold and dismissive. So that's actually all of those kinds of things are explained by attachment behaviors. Attachment theory. So Over the next couple of years, what happened is a bunch of people looked at attachment and they started to look at different kinds of, different sorts of studies, and they came up with a set of different attachment classifications. And over time, those classifications have evolved as we've done more and more research. And so what I'd love to share with you all today is a very, very simple kind of boiled down version of how we classify attachment. So let's take a look. So essentially what people have kind of boiled it down to is there are two axes. So this is the avoidance axis, where there's high avoidance or low avoidance. And the second axis is the anxiety axis. So there's high anxiety and low anxiety. And what they essentially figured out is that we almost have something like a 2x2 table for this kind of thing, where we've got, some people that are up here, so they'll have high anxiety and high avoidance. Let me make sure that y'all can see that, yeah. And then other people will be kind of over here, where they've got low avoidance. Oh, sorry, hold on. I think I need to change my axes. Oh. Hold on a second. Okay, actually, the way I have it written out here, this is completely wrong. Okay, so here is low anxiety, high anxiety, and then up here is low avoidance, and over here is high avoidance. Just make sure I stay connected. Okay. So we've got low avoidance at the top, high avoidance at the bottom, high anxiety on the right, and low anxiety on the left. And what the attachment researchers basically figured out is that depending on which quadrant you're in, that sort of dictates your attachment style. And what they sort of did is they discovered 4 major attachment styles. It originally started out with 3, but over time it sort of developed into 4. So here we've got secure attachment. Over here we've got preoccupied attachment. Over here we've got fearful attachment, and over here we've got dismissive attachment. So what are the features of these different attachment styles? Let's start with actually the features of the axes, okay? So when people are high on the avoidance axis, these are people who are uncomfortable with closeness. They tend to have a strong sense of self-reliance, discomfort with connection. So they kind of pull away from other people. If there's a situation where people are kind of like getting close to them, or as we're becoming more intimate, they'll kind of withdraw. People on the high avoidance side of the spectrum will also have difficulty trusting other people. They oftentimes will cope with threats by like relationship threats by suppression or dissociation from their distress. So for example, someone who's high on the avoidance spectrum, if someone tells them, oh, this relationship isn't really working for me like as much anymore, I think there are some problems in this relationship, we have to talk. What the high avoidance person may do is just be like, okay, fine, if it's not working for you, then let's just break up. They'll kind of dismiss things, they'll dissociate, they'll kind of pull away from perceived threats. So oftentimes people on the high avoidance scale will over-exaggerate their strengths. They tend to minimize intimacy behaviors, so they'll be uncomfortable with things like holding hands or cuddling. Oftentimes, people on the high avoidance side will also have purely sexual relationships because they struggle with intimacy, and they'll oftentimes use a lot of like humor or physicality as part of a relationship, right? So we'll dismiss things, we'll make jokes about things, we're never gonna like talk about things that are serious. On the low avoidance side, we've got people who seek a lot of contact. So people on the low avoidance side can also kind of feel dependent. Okay, so they're like open to contact, they're totally fine with contact, it's all good. So on the high anxiety side, we see people who are very, very worried about their relationships. So they're very, very sensitive to signs of love, right? So these people are vulnerable to things like love bombing. They're also very sensitive to threats of rejection. So if I text you and you don't text me back, my mind is going to start to go insane. I lack confidence in the relationship. So anything that may be a sign of rejection, I'll be very, very sensitive to. The tricky thing about people who are on the high anxiety side is that they'll oftentimes develop adaptive or compensatory strategies. So they know that, oh my God, I'm so sensitive to rejection. I'm so sensitive to signs of love. I'm like kind of very like, I'm kind of high maintenance in that way. So what they'll actually do is adapt to be like chill and cool and like positive and friendly and like, oh, it's okay. Even though inside they're kind of quaking, right? They're really, really concerned, but they're going to kind of pretend or try to like play it off as cool and stuff like that. People on the high anxiety side of the spectrum also will induce a lot of sympathy behaviors. So they'll do things that will be sympathy inducing. So in order to get people to stay, if I can do something that will get someone to feel sympathetic towards me, then that'll like tighten our bond, right? Because if I do something that requires help from another person, that demonstrates to the person that they care and they love me. And so what they'll sometimes actually do is act in sort of a manipulative manner that induces sympathy. Oftentimes people high on the anxiety end of the spectrum will also kind of disclose personal things very, very easily. They'll sort of get connected to people very, very fast. It's like we've known each other for 48 hours and I'm telling them my deepest, darkest secrets. And they also are going to be very, very concerned about partner's rejection, which we sort of mentioned. So a key thing about this is that it's not just actual actions that a partner takes. People who are high on the anxiety side of the spectrum will also have, like, they'll perceive or imagine threats of rejection. So this originally started out as very psychological stuff, but the really cool thing is that there have actually been recent studies on using fMRI and other kinds of neuroscientific technologies that will evaluate blood flow to different parts of the brain. And what we actually find is that when you have people on the low avoidance versus high avoidance end of the spectrum, the way their brains are wired and the way that they sort of direct blood flow actually mirrors these kinds of things. For example, when you have someone who's in a high avoidance, has a high avoidance attachment style, and when they get sort of a perception of a threat to the relationship, when someone says, hey, we need to talk, what we'll actually see is increased blood flow to the parts of the brain that suppress emotions. So we kind of see that they will dissociate or suppress emotions. And that's kind of been neuroscientifically validated. People on the low anxiety side of the axis will be people who are kind of chill, right? So they tend to feel a little bit more confident. They're not so bent out of shape by sort of threats to the relationship. They're just not very anxious about it, okay? So now let's go into more detail about what are the specific attachment styles. So in the top left, we have secure attachment. So people who have secure attachment are confident. They tend to be flirtatious. They're comfortable with flirting, right? So if we think about what flirtatious sort of means, flirtatious is like sort of a signal to that this relationship may be kind of like moving in the right direction. There's a possibility of intimacy. So if you think about what flirting actually is, it's kind of like the prerequisite or the first stage of intimacy. They also tend to be comfortable with closeness. Now, this is also the kind of situation where, from a psychological perspective, we do kind of believe that some attachments are better than others. So if you have an attachment disorder, what a therapist is going to try to help you do is develop a secure attachment style. So generally speaking, people with secure attachments tend to be happier and healthier in relationships. So they'll have like healthy relationships. They tend to be happy in relationships. They can tolerate conflict. They can build intimacy. So there is sort of this inherent value bias when it comes to this whole system. So people develop a secure attachment when they have caregivers that are emotionally supportive, mirroring, and consistent. So this is really, really key. So if you kind of think about when a child is growing up, the child is learning the rules of the world. How does gravity work, right? How do my hands work? How do my feet work? How do I walk? And when kids grow up in a situation where they have parents who are emotionally supportive and consistent, i.e. every time I get a boo-boo, my parent will sort of be caring for me, they'll support me, they'll sort of, be available to me for comfort and things like that. Those are the kids that become confident, right? Because now the world is not a dangerous place. Someone is looking out for me so I can go out and try different things, and I know that I have security at home, right? There's going to be someone there to pick me up if I fall. The next attachment style we're going to talk about is preoccupied attachment, which is high anxiety and low avoidance. So what does that mean? So that means that they seek a lot of connection, and they're also very, very interested in signs of love, and they're very sensitive to threats of rejection. So people who have preoccupied attachment will engage in a lot of sympathy-seeking behaviors. Okay. They're also, as we mentioned, very sensitive to love and rejection. So they want closeness. The tricky thing about people who have a preoccupied attachment style is that on some level they may feel unworthy of love. So they're paranoid, right? Because remember, they have high anxiety. They're paranoid that the relationship will fall apart. They're paranoid that someone will recognize that they can do way better than me. And so how do I deal with that emotion? How do I deal with this fear that this person, I'm kind of unworthy of love fundamentally, right? Because I'm very, very anxious about it, but I'm very, very low avoidance. So I'm going to be really engaging about it. So how do I reassure myself that someone won't leave? And what I'm going to do is engage in sympathy-seeking behavior. I may need help. I may start crying. I may, do all kinds of different stuff to pull the person closer to me. Okay? The next style that we're going to talk about is the dismissive attachment style. So remember, dismissive attachment style is going to have low anxiety and high avoidance. So these people are not really worried, but they also, they don't struggle with a whole lot of anxiety, but they also want to avoid intimate connections. So we tend to see people with a dismissive attachment style have an emphasis on autonomy or self-reliance. I don't need anyone else. I can do it all on my own. They tend to be distrustful of relationships. They tend to fear intimacy. They tend to have, this is what's kind of interesting, is despite the fact that they are very self-reliant, they tend to experience, their subjective experience is a lot of highs and lows emotionally. So even though they will sort of be very, very self-reliant, they still will like kind of suffer a fair amount. So they'll feel really, really good at some times, but other times when someone does kind of like reject them or relationships are kind of falling apart, they're sort of very sensitive. They'll kind of start to feel very emotionally low, and then they'll engage these kinds of dissociation or suppressive techniques. Remember, once again, that people in the dismissive attachment style will sometimes also form like purely sexual relationships and will really, really avoid any kind of intimacy with a potential partner. So if we kind of go back to the strange situation experiment, remember that there are the kids who don't really care when mom leaves, don't really care when the stranger comes back, and don't really care when mom returns. Those are the kids that grow up to sort of have a dismissive attachment style, right? It's the only person I can rely on is myself. And so what we tend to see in dismissive attachment styles is kids who had parents who were consistently emotionally unavailable, right? So the kid had to learn how to manage their emotions on their own because mom or dad is not going to be around to take care of my emotional needs. The last attachment style that we're going to talk about is fearful attachment. Now, this can be sort of confusing because if we look at things like self-reliance on high avoidance, and we look at sort of, seeking a lot of high anxiety with sort of being sensitive to signs of love, threats of rejection, sympathy-inducing behaviors, that may seem like a little bit of a contradiction, right? So are these people self-reliant or are they sympathy-inducing? And this makes perfect sense because actually what we see in fearful attachment styles are people who send a lot of mixed signals. So these are people who are self-reliant, but also kind of feel like they're unworthy of love, right? So what we tend to see in fearful attachment is like something that for partners can be very, very confusing. So what they'll sort of do is be worried and want reassurance, but they also don't want to like get close to people. So what they sort of want is like they crave connection and are simultaneously dismissive of connection. So what we'll see in fearful attachment styles is like, hey, do you want to hang out this weekend? And then someone is like, no, like I'm busy. And then like that actually hurts, but I don't want it to hurt. And then I'll get kind of angry at you because you're busy this weekend. But I won't articulate those kinds of things because like, you know, from your perspective, it doesn't sound like I'm actually that interested in hanging out because I'm kind of dismissive, but I sort of crave connection and dismiss connection at the same time. A couple of other really interesting things about fearful attachment is that these people can often form emotionally intimate connections that are brief and with strangers. So like having a best friend on the internet that you will never see in your life and you can cut off at a moment's notice. You can block them on everything and have an easy 100% escape route. Those are the kinds of people that you'll form connections with. And so that's what really sort of shows in the fearful attachment style is that you crave that connection, but you also want avoidance. You want distance. You're afraid of that kind of intimacy if you kind of fall into this camp. Okay? So fearful attachment style is basically summarized by craving connection and at the same time dismissing connection, which can send a lot of mixed signals and be very confusing for people that they form relationships with. So a couple of other things to kind of note just as we wrap up. So this is sort of a kind of a simple explanation of attachment. So attachment theory is a very, very complex and deep area of research and understanding. I thought I would just share with y'all kind of like as attachment theory has evolved, what have we kind of learned from it? And essentially what we've learned is that there are two axes upon which people sort of form attachments. One is on the anxiety axis. Am I worried about relationships or am I kind of chill about relationships? And the second is the avoidance axis. How much do I seek intimacy versus like kind of going low contact? And as we discover, as we kind of look at all these different kinds of attachment styles, they can basically be reduced to this 2x2 table. So what we tend to find is that depending on your attachment style, you will sort of have difficulty with certain kinds of relationships, or certain kinds of relationships will be easy. The kinds of difficulties that you have in relationships will be determined by what your attachment style is. So one thing that I've noticed as a clinician, for example, is that more of the men that I've worked with have a high avoidance attachment style than a low avoidance attachment style. I'm not saying that that's globally true, right? So I actually don't know the statistics on this. I wouldn't be surprised if we sort of discover that, men are higher on the avoidance side of the scale. But I'm just sort of sharing from my clinical experience that if we sort of look at the way that a lot of men are raised, we're sort of raised along these values of independence and self-reliance. And this is thankfully changing now. But for a lot of boys growing up, there wasn't a lot of emotional support for them. So we sort of see this a little bit more in kind of attachment theory. You also see this kind of play out in romantic comedies and things like that, because there's like a manly man who's like fear of intimacy and doesn't want to hold hands and can't cuddle and those kinds of things, right? So we sort of view those, like we view being the little spoon in a cuddling sort of situation as like an unmanly kind of thing. For a lot of the women that I've worked with, this once again is not, it's just sort of a clinical experience that I've had, which is anecdotal. I tend to see that women tend to be a little bit more on the higher anxiety side when it comes to relationships. That also is not something that is borne out in research and statistically accurate. I actually don't know. It's just been my experience. And it's absolutely possible to be a man who's higher on the anxiety side, a woman to be higher on the avoidance side. And in fact, if we look at the general tenets of attachment theory, what we discover is that gender is actually not one of the key aspects, right? The most important aspect of attachment theory is how your intimate caregivers treated you. And so that's really what attachment theory says, is that how you learned the rules of intimacy growing up will sort of go forward into the rest of your life and will sort of start to dictate the rules for your intimate relationships as an adult. Questions? Okay, so a lot of good questions here. Is it possible to have multiple attachment styles? I feel like I've fluctuated between all four of these throughout my life. So I would kind of say like yes and no. So generally speaking, the majority of attachment theory suggests that people don't move around a lot between them and that you have kind of a attachment style. But remember that like, so while that's true, it's not like it's perfectly true, right? So it's not like you get labeled as fearful attachment and that is you. These are all approximations, generalizations, and based off of populations. So you may be someone who's like right in the middle, right? Where you're not high avoidance, you're not low avoidance, you're like medium avoidance and medium anxiety. And then depending on the individual relationship, you may get kind of pushed into a particular quadrant. And the other thing that we know is that attachment styles can change over time. So people can start out with, let's say, like, preoccupied or anxious attachment, and they can move into the secure attachment over time. So things can change. So it sort of makes sense that you don't fit into one particular bucket, but it's also like, generally speaking, people don't like move rapidly between the quadrants. What a great question. Ella JHS is, what are the parents of the fearful style? So this is really fascinating. So the kids who have a fearful attachment style have parents that, generally speaking, have two qualities. One is inconsistent emotional support. So sometimes when I get a boo-boo, mom or dad is there. So I get enough support to where I don't become fully self-reliant. And other times when I get a boo-boo, parents are very dismissive. So a good example of when I've seen this is actually parents who have substance use disorders. The kids of parents who have substance use disorders will oftentimes have a fearful attachment style. And why is that? It's because the parent that you get when they're drunk is very different from the parent that you get when they're sober, right? So like mom and dad was drinking and yelling at me and even like physically abusive. The next day they feel guilty and they get me lots of gifts. And as a child, that's like friggin' confusing. And so as I grow into an adult, I'm going to be sending mixed signals because mixed signals is what I learned how to send. That's what the parents sent me. The other really interesting thing is if you look at research, fearful attachment style is also associated with parents who have high emotional needs. So when a child becomes the emotional caregiver in the relationship, they will oftentimes develop a fearful attachment style. So this is the kind of thing where if you're emotionally the caregiver of your parent, you want connection. You guys have a certain amount of intimacy, right? You get intimacy, but only some of the time. Your emotional needs only get met some of the time. So you're kind of stuck between the situation where half the time I have to be self-reliant, and the other half of the time the parent is actually available and can take care of me. So what we sort of see is like there are a couple of interesting correlations between substance use, between emotionally needy caregivers, and fearful attachment. Great question. Jonathan's 1212 is asking, what can you do if you're fearful? Does it depend on your situation, or is there a general path forward? So this is a great question. The answer is a little bit of both. So here's how to understand this like psychological research and how it applies to you. So here's what we do in science, okay? We take 1,000 people and we study them and we see what generalizations float to the surface. And then once we have a generalization, that generalization is going to imperfectly apply to the 1,000 people. So it's still going to apply, but it's not going to be perfect because that generalization is like a synthesis of kind of an average of what applies to all 1,000 of those people. So is there a general path forward? Yes, right? So we have textbooks, for example, that will teach therapists how to help patients who have a fearful attachment style. So it's like, here's the general strategy. But when it comes down to applying a general scientific principle to your life, it's going to have to be personalized, right? And that's why therapy is like done individually oftentimes. Because even though there are general principles which you can educate a therapist, there are going to be specifics in your situation. I think the first thing to understand if you've got a fearful attachment style is that you have a fearful attachment style. So that's like kind of the first thing to kind of start with. And so I would sort of ask yourself, do I dismiss connection when other people try to connect to me? do I pull away? And the second question is, do I feel really lonely and crave connection? So once you understand that you have those conflicting feelings, that I feel lonely and I reach out for connection, but the moment someone rejects me, like I'm going to pull away for self-preservation, right? So that's going to be your kind of dynamic. And then what happens is once you recognize these things within yourself, they will manifest in particular behaviors. And they're going to manifest in like tiny little, almost petty ways. Like I texted them and they didn't text me back. And then in your head, you start like thinking all kinds of stuff. Like this person doesn't really care about me. I don't need them, right? We start engaging in emotional suppression where like we feel hurt by them, but we kind of beat ourselves up for feeling hurt by them. So we tell ourselves, actually, I don't care about this person. And then you numb yourself. And what's going to happen is like that's actually going to sabotage the relationship because even if you feel hurt by them, maybe that hurt was appropriate, maybe it's inappropriate, but you're kind of shutting down communication. So generally speaking, what I found to be really successful in working with people who have fearful attachment styles is first of all, communicate with the other person. Secondly, recognize that you're going to be sending mixed signals and do your best to explain or even restrain some of those signals, right? And this is the key thing is that communication and signals are kind of like opposite ends of the spectrum. When you explicitly communicate, I mean, you could argue that that's a signal, but when I really work with people, what I tend to find is either they communicate or they send some signal, right? I'm going to tell you that I'm upset with you, or I'm going to ignore your text messages for a week. Those two are almost mutually exclusive. I mean, they're not because obviously communication is a signal. But oftentimes, especially when it comes with fearful attachment people, what they do is they'll use signals instead of communicating. And oftentimes they'll send conflicting signals. So just do your best to not send conflicting signals, or if you do feel conflicted, which is going to be really common, that you do your best to articulate that. As you articulate that, the other person will understand where you're coming from. Now that can be really scary because we don't want the other person to understand where we're coming from, right? We want to be self-reliant. But as you sort of communicate with them, instead of like judge them by a standard that they're not aware of, which is really common in fearful attachment style, where there's like, I'm grading you, but you don't even know you're being tested and you don't even know how I'm grading you. I'm going to wait 3 days and then I'm going to send you a text. And if the response of your text is longer than my text, then I will forgive you. So there are all these weird, complicated things that happen internally with like people who have fearful attachment style. So I'd be careful about that kind of stuff as well. Basically, you want to be very aware of your mixed signals and do your best to communicate your way through them. And the cool thing is, as you stop kind of sabotaging your relationship with mixed signals, you'll become more emotionally intimate and start to move more towards a secure attachment style. Crashsters is asking, why are preoccupied attracted to dismissive? Oh, okay. What a great question. Let me just think about this for a second. So, preoccupied attachment, which is very, very high anxiety, low avoidance, right? So they're highly engaging in sympathy-inducing behaviors. They believe they're kind of unlovable. Generalization, okay? And on the dismissive attachment style, it's all about self-reliance. Like, even on some level, I crave that connection, right? Because all human beings crave connection. But I've learned to not trust people because people have shown me that they're not trustworthy. So in a weird way, this is a match made in heaven. It's a torturous relationship, but it fits. So here's why. So the person who has a preoccupied attachment style feels unlovable. And what kind of signals does a dismissive person send? I don't really care about you. You're not really worth loving. So the world makes sense between these two groups, right? I don't love you and you don't feel unlovable. That's actually like a match made in heaven. So oddly enough, if you look at people who have a preoccupied attachment style, if someone is very caring and supportive towards them consistently, sometimes, and I didn't trick you into it, if I didn't manipulate you into caring about me, right? If I didn't do some sympathy-inducing behavior and you did something nice for me anyway, it actually frightens preoccupied attachment people They start to think, oh my God, what am I missing? Like, when is the other shoe dropping? Like, as someone is consistent and loving to them, they're like, I'm unworthy of this love. What am I missing? So it's super paradoxical that people who feel unlovable, when someone treats them with love and respect, they actually get paranoid because that's not the rules of the game. Remember, attachment style is when our brains learn the rules of relationships. And what the preoccupied person learns is that unless I force someone to love me, I'm unlovable. So unless I use sympathy-inducing behaviors, pretend to be sick, I'm struggling with this, I got broken up with, my abusive partner broke up with me again, and now I need love and support, and unless I'm doing something to evoke those sympathy-inducing behaviors, because that's why I do it, right? To induce those behaviors. If someone treats me well without that kind of stuff, it confuses the hell out of me. So dismissive and preoccupied people fit really well together because I feel unlovable and the dismissive person makes me feel unloved, which is great, right? So we're on the same page there. It's actually terrible. It's a super toxic relationship. And on the flip side, remember that the dismissive person wants to be self-reliant, right? I don't want to rely on anyone else. I want relationships in which I can be in charge. So dismissive people also tend to be really, really controlling. And what they tend to find is that preoccupied attachment people are willing to play that game. So I know that this person will never actually leave me because they're so dependent. So it's very safe for the dismissive person. They're not going to hold me accountable for my behavior. They're always going to be there for me in a weird way. So I feel pretty good about that. They're dependable, right? So on the one hand, they're dependent. On the flip side, they're dependable. So we do see that a lot. Really good question. Do we usually gravitate towards people with similar attachment styles? Not really. So I think this is where attraction doesn't really have anything to do with attachment style. Attachment style manifests in the intimate parts of the relationship. So it's not even necessarily friendship or acquaintances. So you can be friends with all kinds of different people. It's when the intimacy enters the picture that we see all these attachment kind of manifestations. Kurosu is asking, is there a theory about romantic compatibility between attachment styles? Do you need to be secure before dating? So like we just talked about, there are some attachment styles that are compatible, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy, okay? So there may be a lot of preoccupied people who are dating dismissive people and vice versa. But that doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is healthy. What we do tend to know, and this is where potentially this is a bias, but I think it's pretty accurate, that the more secure attachment you've got in relationships, the better off the relationship will be in terms of a health standpoint. So if you get two people who have secure attachment, they will have, on average, a healthier relationship than other kinds of people. Right, but it doesn't mean that you can't have, you can have healthy relationships with all of the above. So, for example, two preoccupied people can become very, very codependent, right? But they're like this, and they can make it work. Two dismissive people can get together, right? So when we're kind of emotionally cold and let's say we're a power couple who doesn't really care about each other's emotional needs, but we're we're sort of we can build an alliance as opposed to an intimate relationship that's mutually beneficial. And it approximates love because we're physically attracted to each other and we also enjoy having sex because we're both sexual creatures. So that happens too. So you can form healthy versions between all of the above. But generally speaking, remember this is population-wise, the more secure attachment you've got in a relationship, the healthier it's going to be. There are papers about this, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands. So do these lead to personality disorders? Good question, Psych Breezy. So remember that the key thing about an attachment style is that it is relational in nature. So it is the way that you relate to another person. A personality disorder is something you carry around all by yourself. Now, the personality structure will absolutely influence relationships, right? So if I have narcissistic personality disorder or dependent personality disorder or avoidant personality disorder, or borderline personality disorder, all of them, that will absolutely impact my relationships. But one is sort of relational in nature. The lens that the resolution that we're looking at is like 2 people versus 1 person, if that makes sense. So if I'm at bottom right, am I done for? Absolutely not. That's the whole point. You're not done for. There are plenty of things that you can do. You just have to understand where the mixed signals are coming from and then be super careful about giving in to the mixed signals. So someone's asking, how do attachment styles correspond to different relationship types, platonic, sexual, work? So remember, attachment style manifests in intimate relationships. So that's why like attachment style may not affect anything at work or platonic or even sexual. It's about intimacy. So even in the case of, let's say, a dismissive attachment, you may find that like at work, if there's someone who like you have trouble forming like a close mentor-mentee relationship, you may like withdraw from that kind of thing, for example. So some people may be, whereas like if you're preoccupied, you may be like very, very like seeking mentors all the time and guidance and need a lot of support and things like that. Right? So they can manifest, but it's really about intimacy as opposed to a setting. Okay, let's okay. Should we move on? Polaritude is asking, can you be secure attachment yet still be generally antisocial when it comes to groups and acquaintances? Absolutely. That's my whole point. Is if you really look at, once again, these are generalizations, right? So maybe an expert in attachment theory will disagree with me. But generally speaking, attachment plays a larger role in intimate relationships, the more intimate it becomes. So there isn't necessarily a correlation, for example, between extroversion and introversion. I mean, there may be, right? So maybe someone has looked at personality factors and attachment style. There may be some kind of correlation. But generally speaking, we think of attachment as like not social. It's not like general social stuff. It's like intimate social stuff. And that's what's so confusing about it is that you can be super friendly and kind and caring and like be a really awesome person. But the second you enter an intimate relationship, all kinds of weird things start to happen. Your behavior starts to change, right? So a good example of that is like I've worked with people who have a dismissive attachment style who are wonderful people. They'll help you out anytime you ask, but like they're going to keep you at arm's length. So if you need help moving, they're there. But they'll never confide in you. And if you confide in them or try to like create intimacy in the relationship, like they're going to get scared and kind of pull away. Can you do specific lectures on each attachment style later? Absolutely. So I want to. So that's why we're starting with sort of like a basic introductory lecture. There's also a lot of really interesting stuff. I mean, this is like maybe a little bit outside of our scope, but what I've noticed, so remember how chat, y'all have to let me know. Please let me know whether I'm stepping in a landmine here. So as I've been trying to understand gender dynamics on the internet, what I've noticed is that a lot of like the gender specific spaces seem to have people who resonate with a particular attachment style. Does that make sense? So if you like look at the values of some spaces on the internet, they seem to correlate with particular attachment styles. Mr. President, get down. Okay. I can't tell if y'all are trolling or not. Right? So I'll let y'all draw your own conclusions. So like I recognize they're landmines. Can y'all I mean like it's kind of like, you know, some of it's kind of, because I think what happens is that sometimes we'll get particular spaces that will validate the experience of a particular attachment style. What is our community's attachment style? I mean, I think there's all kinds, right? So I think we actually have a pretty good spread. So one thing that we're pretty consistent, we can talk about our own community, is we're like basically a place that's built on emotional intimacy with strangers. Right? Does that make sense? So when we're talking about fearful attachment, like, yeah, I can't form connections with other people, like people that I see, but I can absolutely talk to someone on the internet about my deepest, darkest problems. Right? Which is like, I don't think that that's bad, because those people need emotional support. So that's what's cool, right? So like, even if you fall into that category where like I can discuss my deepest, darkest secrets with strangers on the internet, which I absolutely fall into that camp too. It's easier to me to talk to chat than it is for me to talk to like people that I know in my life, right? Because y'all are kind of like formless. It's like, I know y'all are real people, but like, the whole point of that is that now that y'all are here, right, we can teach you about this stuff, and we can actually like stop doing things this way. Can confirm am formless. Yeah, so there's Akarat is like, what is a real person? I'm literally water. So, I mean, I think that's what's kind of interesting about this stuff, is if we kind of think about it like, you know, parasocial relationships, there's absolutely something to be learned about parasocial relationships and attachment style. There's got to be some kind of connection there. I don't know what it is, but what we're discovering is that the internet is allowing us to form different kinds of relationships, even certain kinds of intimacy that have not existed in the history of humanity. And so, like, that's absolutely playing in. I don't know how. I don't know exactly what it's doing, but it is. And so that's why, you know, we're going to figure it out, right? Like, we're going to figure it out. Okay. Let's move on. So Pleb XL is saying, what if I say you've been talking to AI all the time and all the streams is one big movie about the psychologist who lost it? I'd say that's totally okay. Right? So I showed up to try to do something. And even if everyone ends up being an AI and is not a real person, like, I still tried my best. I showed up, I tried to help. I offered what I could. And if it's all in the matrix, like, that's okay. My actions are not valid based on whether it helped or not. At least I don't, because I can't control that, right? Maybe y'all could be all AIs, and maybe I'm in a coma somewhere, and like, this is all happening in my head. But the question isn't, the question is like, what are the actions I take, and what is my intention behind the action? Does that make sense? So when we talk about, you know, being action-oriented instead of outcome-oriented, we talk about devoting to action as opposed to like devoting yourself to outcome. So it doesn't, you know, it'd be kind of unfortunate, but like, how was I supposed to know any differently? Wake up, Dr. K? I don't want to. If I wake up, then all y'all disappear. I'd rather stay asleep and with y'all than to wake up and lose you. How's that for attachment? Right? I'll stay. Seriously, I'm not kidding. It's not a joke. right? So if I'm asleep, I'll wake up one day. But before that happens, I'm going to do what I can. And if I'm not asleep and this is my actual life, then one day I'll be dead. And then this will all be over. So in either case, what I'm doing today still remains the same. Right? We still got to do the work that we can do today. Doesn't change. Does that make sense? So that means you feel happy, right? It's not about happiness. Or if y'all were here on Monday, right? So like, it gives me peace to try to do what I can. That's stream about death. Shunya_0. Oh my goodness. We stream about death a lot. Okay, on that note, because things are getting kind of dark, and I feel like this is going to be too hard of a transition unless we make it fast. All right, next up. Can you make a video about virginity? Can we talk about this, chat? Does that sound okay? Or do we want to talk about death? I know, hard shift. That's what I'm saying, but it's important. Feel me. Feel me, bruv. Okay? I get that it's a hard shift. That's when I'm with you. That's why it's like, we got to stop now. Who knows where we're like, the further that we go into like death and shunya and the void and all this like matrix and AI, and it's like, then we're going to talk about getting laid. It's like, we've already gone too far off the path and like, we got to turn back now. Otherwise, okay. All right. Okay. Thanks for the gifted subs. My gosh. This is my favorite chat on the internet. Mine too, Jiggy Maru. Mine too. This is great. You know what I love about hanging out with y'all? What I love about hanging out with y'all is we're actually doing important work and it happens to be fun. That's so hard. Like learning something, doing some good, and maybe it's presumptuous for me to say we're doing some good in the world. I mean, that probably is, but based on the feedback that we get, you know, that's what I'm basing it on, which could be AI generated. But it's like, you know, if only mental health education was like this. You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't have to be sober. Like health class, when I was in the 7th grade, health class was the most boring crap ever. It was taught by a coach. We were all giggling about penises. And the coach was like embarrassed. And like, I was at a Catholic school. So like, they wouldn't say particular things, but they would like hint at particular things. So, you know. And it's like, this is what we're doing. So like, everyone has a body and a mind. And this is how we're going to teach them. Like, this is the class that should have, it's the most universal class you will take. Everyone will use some amount of math, some amount of science, sure. But everyone has a body, everyone has a mind. And the fact that we don't really emphasize, like, hey, here's the most basic tool that you're ever going to have in your life. Like, we're not going to teach you how to use it. Good luck. Instead, we will teach you how to use a protractor. Because we all know that protractors are really, really important. So we're going to spend 1 year teaching you the intricate details of a protractor. You know, like, you got to calculate the volume of a trapezoid or sphere, right? Because that comes in handy every single day. But understanding where tiredness comes from, how to go to sleep effectively, understanding where your desires come from, we don't need that. Trapezoid build. Okay. Mogumaru saying, I really appreciate your videos. Dr. K, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, Mogumaru. Happy they're hopefully they've helped you in some way or at least entertained you at the least. If we provided entertainment, thumbs up. If they've helped you in some way, double thumbs up. Okay? Okay. As real. They don't want us to understand ourselves so the wealthy corporations can continue to rule through capitalism. Look, I'm not very knowledgeable in this stuff, but I find it hard to believe that my 7th grade health class gym coach person was a capitalistic agent trying to maintain, the dystopia. Like, I find it hard to believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's some elaborate conspiracy and he was getting paid by ExxonMobil and like Big Pharma to not teach us about, maybe, but I just find it hard to believe. He didn't seem like he was implementing a worldwide conspiracy to keep us ignorant. I do. I'm not saying you're wrong. Who knows, right? So like maybe like when it comes to lobbying for health education, there are powers, because we certainly know that's true, right? So like a lot of people will like lobby heavily for primary education to contain certain things and not contain other things. So maybe that's like me being ignorant. So maybe in some way there is some connection there. Makes sense, actually. The capitalist agents put me in the coma. Okay, let's get back to it. All right. This stream sponsored by water. We are so far from where we're supposed to be. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about virginity. Can you make a video about virginity? I'm an adult virgin and I'm massively insecure about it. I used to have a ton of insecurities tied to my virginity, thinking I hadn't had sex because I wasn't funny enough, interesting enough, kind enough, attractive enough, etc. Through Dr. K's videos, I've managed to separate all of these insecurities from my virginity. I have friends, including girls, that think I'm funny, interesting, kind, attractive. But despite this, just the fact that I've never had sex bothers me. No matter how much I try to convince myself it doesn't mean anything, a part of my mind goes to the fact that I want to but haven't. And it must be because of some kind of flaw. And society claims to be supportive of virgins, especially on the internet. But in reality, it's not the case. I get bullied, made fun of, pitied, etc. And even if people don't actually care if you're a virgin, when they use it as an insult, it hurts. For example, when someone says something misogynistic and someone says you clearly never felt the touch of a woman, it still feels like a personal insult, implying that people who can't get laid are like that because they're misogynistic. When in reality, some of the people I know who are the most popular with girls are massively misogynistic. When people offer advice for dealing with this, it's always useless. They either say it's easy to get laid and it's your own fault if you can't, which makes the insecurities worse, or they say you just shouldn't care, like I don't battle to convince myself every day that it's not something to be ashamed of, and that I could just wake up one day and become unbothered with ease, which also makes the insecurities worse because now I'm both insecure about being a virgin and about caring. Just change, just be different. Or they say work on yourself, which is good general life advice and something I do and helps a lot in many parts of my life, but does not help at all for this particular issue. Even in this community, I've heard those kinds of things. The only people who actually seem to listen and validate your experience are red pillars and black pillars, but I don't agree with either of those communities. The only person who seems to actually understand and offer useful advice to lonely men without turning to misogyny is Dr. K, which is why I really feel like it would be really helpful if he made a video specifically on the topic of how to not be ashamed when you're a virgin despite trying to get laid. Okay, looks like I have big shoes to fill. So first of all, Really appreciate the post. I think it's really great that we have a place that we can talk about this kind of stuff without resorting to toxic communities. So let's try to understand, like, what's the deal with virginity? Okay? So, like, sometimes we are virgins, right? So we're at a particular age. You know, I've heard people complain about being a virgin at the age of 30, 35, even 60, 65. I was talking to a monk once. He was talking about his regrets in life. But also like 19, 18, 17, even 15. So we all, or not all, but society basically conditions us to value being able to have sex. And it sort of makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, right? Like, so like the purpose of life is procreation. So like, if you're not procreating, you're like not worthy in some way. And then that kind of maybe general evolutionary thing then gets extrapolated, overinterpreted, you know, pulled far, far, far away from evolutionary biology. And people start making generalizations in society about your value as a human being, whether you've gotten laid or not laid, right? Like, people do that. And so there are a lot of people out there who try to be supportive, and it's like, hey, you know, just like work on yourself, like you'll be okay, like it's all right. And I think that this is where, as the person sort of mentioned, the red pill and the black pill communities are very emotionally validating in this way, right? They're the one place where people are going to sort of like acknowledge that this is a problem. They're going to do very different things with it. So the red pill community is, here's a guide to get laid, right? It's kind of like, this is the way of the world. The black pill community is going to say, and I'm generalizing here as well, you can't get laid, you're screwed just like we are, we might as well all give up, right? Because there's no hope. So if you're someone who's a virgin and you're insecure about it, which sort of makes sense, right? Because like the reason you're insecure is because there is this societal pressure. And even if some people are supportive, like people still kind of like, you know, you're going to get a double take. Even if someone's trying to be nice and you kind of tell them, oh yeah, I've never had sex before. Like, let's say you're on your third date with someone. You're like, yeah, I've never had sex before. Right? Because y'all are talking about previous partners. Like, you're going to get a double take. Like, you're going to get that tiny amount of judgment. You're going to get it like, oh, you know? And then like, what does that mean? Is there something wrong with this person? Like, what are they thinking now? Like, do I want to have sex with someone who's never had sex before? Like, there's all kinds of like implicit judgments. And then the problem is that if we're in this situation, there isn't really a clear way out, right? So is this an issue of insecurity and shame? Because if this is an issue of insecurity and shame, like, I can go work on myself. I can go learn about my insecurities. I can meditate. I can go see a therapist. I can learn about all this stuff, and I can even fix my insecurity and shame. But fixing your insecurity and shame doesn't like automatically mean you're going to get laid, right? Like, obviously. But the people who sort of advise you to fix the insecurity and shame and like, don't worry about being a virgin, it's not like you can do that, but it's not like people are lining up outside the door. It's like you're like, I'm cured of shame, and you walk around with like a sign, and then people are like, oh, like, let's have sex. It doesn't work like that. On the flip side, there are people who are sort of giving you like advice on how to get laid, right? If your problem is that you're a virgin, go get laid. Here's how you, so this person is, I think, a man who's interested in women. So let's assume a heteronormative perspective here. Although the shame, especially amongst homosexual men, is like, I know it sounds bizarre, but can be very, very high. I've almost seen more shame in homosexual men because there's a presumption that if I'm gay, like, gay dudes are down to have sex like all the time. So if you can't get laid, like, you know, and like all that kind of stuff, the shame can be really, really crippling for homosexual men. So shame can be crippling for women as well for the same reason. It's like, oh, like, dudes are down to get laid anytime. So if I can't get laid and I'm a woman, like, there must be something even worse, right? So there's all kinds of stuff. Like, the shame is piling on. And when it comes to actually like going out and, let's say, getting laid, like, there are people who will tell you all this kind of stuff. Like, oh, just like get out more and like go meet people and things like that. But when you go do that, like, I don't know how to say this, but if people say like, okay, just meet more people. So let's say like I go to a party, okay? If I go to a party and like I am insecure about myself and I am ashamed about myself for being a virgin, how do you think that's going to affect how I behave at the party? How do you think that's going to affect like how I talk to girls? right? So now this is the challenge, is that a lot of people are giving advice about what to do. You can sign up for some course where they'll like teach you like, you know, like how to date. Like, oh my God, like I'm going to teach you all the secrets that will get you laid. And then you do that, but then you're carrying this bundle of insecurity, which actually sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you lack confidence and you go to a social situation, then like that's going to shine through in some way, right? And it's going to sabotage your efforts to form intimate connections with people. So what do you do if you're in this situation? Because fixing the shame isn't enough. And also like just going out and trying to get laid doesn't work. And there's a really simple reason for this. And that's because the two things are synergistic. So if you really want to learn how to overcome this, you kind of got to do both. And this is actually what I found really frustrating when I was learning to be a therapist, when I was still training to be a therapist. I remember and so this could be a bias of my particular education, you know, which on paper is good, but you know, no training program is going to be perfect. But one of the things that really frustrated me about therapy is that the standard in therapy is if a patient walks into your office and says, "Can you help me find a girlfriend?" The right answer is not yes. The right answer is, well, what do you think? What do you think makes it hard for you to find a girlfriend? Right? What does it mean to you if I were to say yes? What would it mean to you if I would say no? And when I say the right answer, this is literally what I was instructed to say. That you can't ever help a patient accomplish a particular thing. I mean, you can help, but you can't make them accomplish a particular thing. Right? So people would come into the office and like, a therapist cannot give you a plan to find a girlfriend, which is sort of correct in one sense, but it really kind of bothered me. And that's when I realized that, you know, what therapy is really about, the focus is really about sort of fixing that internal shame, which isn't enough. It's absolutely a step in the right direction, and therapists can absolutely help you if you're in this situation. So don't get me wrong there. But it's that therapy is really not focused on that practical aspect. And on the flip side, you have all these people like pickup artists that are purely focused on the practical aspect, but don't understand anything of the internal struggles you face when people give you advice, which is why advice is useless. Right? So like this person says advice is useless because if someone says, yeah, just go out and just talk to girls. But like, what about this roiling bundle of emotions that makes that impossible for me? So what we've actually got to do is look at the intersectionality between two things. It's to acknowledge that, first of all, working on your shame is going to be insufficient, and going to parties is going to be insufficient. That this is a solution that's kind of like chopsticks. Like you can't get anywhere with one chopstick. You need both of them. Right? I guess you could spear something depending on what it is, but and that's right. So I don't know. The analogy fell apart, but I feel like you need both of these things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay. So if you're struggling to get laid, we're going to talk a little bit about insecurities and not feeling confident in yourself as a virgin. And more importantly, how to practically apply that to like an action plan that will get you to where you want to go. So let's take a look at this, okay? All right. So here's the problem, okay? So we start life, and we've got a trajectory. And generally speaking, what happens in life is that we'll have particular milestones or opportunities. So let's say that like I enter high school. Let's say this is the normal path where I date someone in high school. Or I deviate and I never date in high school. Right? And then what happens is we've got another path over here where date someone in college. Or deviate, no dates in college. Right? And then at some point, we're also going to have lose virginity or be a 26-year-old virgin. And now the problem is that like once we kind of miss these milestones, we're kind of behind in two ways. The first is that each of these things is going to lead to an insecurity or an identity. right? Let's just say I'm unlovable, ugly, unable to get laid. I'm a beta. Call it whatever you want, okay? But this is like an identity that you carry forward. Now, the problem is that even at this stage, when you go to a party, this identity actually goes and sabotages your attempts to get back on track. So it stops you from moving in this direction. Does that make sense? Because when you go to a party and you start talking to someone, say you're talking to a girl, we're going to assume a heteronormative male perspective because that's what the post was. It applies any way you want to cut it, though. This thought, this insecurity actually prevents you from getting back on track. The second problem is as we have these experiences, we level up our social skills, right? So social XP here, social XP here. And so if you look at this person, in addition to not having the identity issues, is also like level 5 when it comes to social skills. Right? So now we get to see something else, which is that even if I fix this, so let's say that I make this, fix it, and then I can go to the party. The problem is that over here, I still have level 1 social skills. And so now, even though I've sort of fixed the shame, I go to a party, like I just don't know how to talk to people. Like I don't know how to flirt, right? Because this person is not like an expert flirter. And if I go to a party and I don't know how to flirt, I fail my flirting check. Then what happens? Whoop. I still end up over here. And so then what happens is like I try all kinds of different stuff, right? So people are like, they'll say like, oh, try this and try this and try this and try this. And if I'm trying different things, what's going to happen is this keeps on sabotaging stuff. Or even if I sort of resolve that, I just don't have the social skills like necessary. And then what happens is as I fail these kinds of things, or if I go to parties, right, and I don't get laid, what happens? As I fail my flirting check, now I'm going over here and I'm reinforcing these kinds of thoughts. Does that make sense? So we get trapped as a virgin. The virgin trap. Missed social milestones. Internal insecurities. Sabotage our future prospects. And then the problem is that even if we recognize this, we can try to fix the insecurities, but then we're not leveled up enough. Or we just go out and we try to fix things, like we just try to level up, right? We're just going to socially participate. But we've got this huge penalty to all of our checks because of the identity issues and the insecurity. So how do we overcome this? First thing we got to do, watch out for generalizations. So I want y'all to take a look at this. What do y'all notice about this post? Okay. Society claims to be supportive. It feels like a personal insult. It's always useless, right? People that offer advice. Like, so you got to be really careful. Or they say work on yourself, which is general good life advice. So you've got to be really careful about generalization. So if you look at these communities, like red pillars and black pillars, most of these communities are going to be relatively generalizing. And so why is it important to avoid generalizations? Because that's not how people actually work, right? So we talked about this a little bit. There can be things that are generally true, but at the end of the day, you're an individual person. And like the person that you're trying to date or you're trying to have sex with is an individual person. And generalizations happen very, very naturally. So like, let's try to understand where generalizations come from. So there are two basic things that happen that we have to be super careful about. The first is that the human brain is designed to generate patterns. It's designed to generalize. That's why we do it. Like, that's like, if you look up at clouds, for example, and you see animals, there aren't animals in clouds. That's your brain generating a pattern out of like random data. That's first thing. The second thing is the human brain is biased towards the negative. What does that mean? That means that if you talk to 20 people about being a virgin and 19 of them are supportive and one of them is unsupportive, your brain will actually latch on to the one out of 20. Like literally. Right? So there have been studies on this. So a good example of this is a common one that I use, illustrates the principle well, food poisoning. So you can eat the same dish 20 times. First 19 times, you don't get food poisoning. You get food poisoning once, and your body is going to have a visceral biological reaction to avoid that thing. We also see it in content creators, where you can be looking at chat, right, if you're streaming on Twitch, or you can upload a video to YouTube, and there can be 100 good comments, but your brain will sift out the one negative comment. Now, why does it do that? It's because it's a survival mechanism. Because chances are, it's like, if there are 19 ropes or 20 ropes in my shed and one of them is a snake, I need to be able to find the one bad apple amongst all the good apples, because the bad apple is the one that really screws me up, right? So our brain is biased towards the negative and biased to generate patterns. When we put these two things together, what we end up with is negative generalizations about the world. Once we have negative generalizations, like why is that a bad thing? It's because it actually sabotages our future efforts. If I go into social situations believing that society hates me because I'm a virgin, that resentment towards society is not going to be attractive to other people, right? So I can't just tell you, just don't do that. But what I'm saying is, like, pay attention to what's going on here. So anytime you have a generalization, ask yourself, how did I form that generalization? And then you've got to be super careful, because the internet loves echo chambers. So you have one negative experience, and then the nice thing about the red pill and black pill communities are that they're validating, they're supportive. Like, that's a good thing, right? They're like, oh, like, you suffer, I suffer too. I'm sorry that you're suffering so much. And then as soon as you join that community, you get stuck in the echo chamber, right? And then lots of people are validating you, and then you accumulate evidence to support your generalization. Now, the challenge is that once you start generalizing and once you start kind of believing that stuff, it's actually going to sabotage your attempts at kind of getting into stuff in a healthy way. So once you sort of are aware of that cautionary principle, become aware of where your generalizations come from, become aware of, more importantly, we'll get to this in a second, how your generalizations influence your actual actions. Okay? And now we're going to go back to the drawing board and take a look at that. Okay? So this is kind of the first thing to sort of understand. The second thing is that we need a synergistic approach. What does that mean? That means that we have to deal with the shame and we have to level up socially. Okay? Neither of these is going to be sufficient on their own. And the most common mistake that I see when anyone is talking about, like, getting laid or forming a relationship or whatever, is that they assume that there's like one part of the answer. I hear either or. Go to a therapist to go work on your internal shame issues. Therapist isn't going to teach you how to flirt. Or go to a dating coach to learn how to flirt. Dating coach isn't going to fix your shame issues. That's why this problem persists, because we don't have a professional that can do both. Okay? So, now, how do you do these, right? Okay, so first thing, ask yourself this question. How do I feel about myself? Write it down on one piece of paper. Ideally, pen or pencil instead of typing. Now, you can answer this question reflexively, right? You're going to get a reflexive response. Here's why the reflexive response isn't good enough. Because the reflexive response is going to come from the generalization. It's not an actual response. It's going to be like an emotional response. It's going to be a general response. Right? So be careful so write it out. The second half of what you write is where the money is going to be. So become aware of, I guess for lack of a better term, self-opinion. This is really important. We'll show you how or why later. Number 2, how do I feel about other people? Once again, write minimum 1 page. There's going to be a reflexive answer. Other people are okay. I like other people. No, you don't. Right? No, you don't. And then if your reflexive answer is that all people suck, that's just not true. Right? Like, it's not true. Not all people are bad. Like, I mean, maybe you really believe that. Maybe. Right? There are probably people who are justified in believing that. Like, serially abused and like all kinds of stuff. Like, there may be people who believe that. Maybe that's a valid perspective. But I generally think that people who say those kinds of things, it's the reflexive response. So as you write a page, you will discover the nuances in your thinking. What you'll probably end up with is some amount of internal conflict. Some people suck. Or all people suck some of the time. And this is a magical statement because already you've made progress. And we'll show you how in a second, okay? So now you're going in with some amount of understanding. Now the key thing here is that we're going to take these understandings and we're going to apply them to actual actions, okay? Third thing, now what we're going to do is socialize with intention, okay? So what does this mean? This means that when we socialize, we're not just going to go somewhere and hang out. There's a lot of evidence that shows that humans who are intentional do better, right? So like, for example, like if you're trying to get better at a video game, you can mindlessly grind at the video game for 10,000 hours and like you're going to stay the same, right? You can look at, like, there are people who've played a game for 10,000 hours and are still like hard stuck at bronze or whatever. There's data that shows that you can predict which physicians are going to have better outcomes, which physicians are good and which physicians are bad, within 2 years of them starting practice. And you can have a physician who has 5 years of experience who has better outcomes than a physician who has 35 years of experience. And what's the difference? It's because the one who has 5 years of experience is an intentional learner. And the one who's got 35 years of experience is on autopilot. Same thing with video games. Studies have been done on medical outcomes. It's probably your own experience as well. So socialize with intention. Now the question is, what does this mean with intention? Focus on friends first. Right? Now we get to the fun part. So when I tell you to focus on friends, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to a party and your goal is going to be, Dr. K said, focus on friends. And internally, are you going to be focused on friends? No, you are not. Why not? Because of this. You're going to have some thoughts and feelings. When you actually go to a party, you're going to feel resentment. Why do I have to focus on friends? Why did I end up this way? Why can't I just find a girlfriend? Your internal response is going to hate focusing on friends. Be aware of that internal response, right? Because here's what's going to happen. Unless you do that, you're going to focus on friends. You're going to be a robot and do what people tell you to do. And it ain't going to work because your heart is not in it. You're going to be mechanically going through the motions of forcing yourself to make friends while internally you're not truly focused on it. Because internally you're like, okay, this is a step to get me laid. And now I'm going to make a friend and I'm not laid. Why did I waste my time? I'm going to make 2 and I didn't get laid. Why did I waste my time? I'm going to make 3 and I didn't get laid. Why did I waste my time? You're not truly focusing on friends. Why am I saying focusing on friends? It's because you got to level up. You got to level up. So I'm going to learn how to talk to people without being awkward. And you may say, how on earth do I learn to talk to people without being awkward? Very simple. You practice until you no longer feel awkward. It's going to feel awkward. And then you're going to do it. And there's this little circuit in your brain that develops tolerance, right? It's the same circuit that when you jump into a pool of water, it feels cold at the beginning, and then you develop tolerance to it. The first time you tried something, it was hard. If you just keep doing it, you will no longer feel awkward. We're going to learn how to just practice socializing and having conversations with people. Okay? Other things that you can do, smile. Practice smiling, right? So smile at people. You don't want to be creepy about it. You don't want to like make eye contact for an extended period of time, right? Do y'all remember this? We don't want to do that, right? So, but you want to smile, like, so the next time you're at the grocery store, smile at the person who checks out. Hey, thank you very much. Smile at your waiter or waitress. Okay? Now, next thing we're going to do once we practice a little bit, at some point, both your greatest hope and your worst fear will happen. Are you all ready? Greatest hope and worst fear. You ready for it? You're going to be attracted to someone. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And then what are you going to do? Run away? No. We are going to make our intentions known. Instead of waffling around in the friend zone, we're going to let them know we're attracted to them. This is so hard. Why is it so hard? Because of this crap. Because I feel insecure. Because of this crap. And because of this crap. This is why we did those practices. As you make your intentions known, thoughts are going to come up. I'm unlovable. I'm pathetic. People suck. People hate virgins. They've always hated virgins. They used to sacrifice them to the gods. All of these thoughts are going to get in the way of you doing this. And this is how people get stuck in the friend zone and remain virgins. Because they're so afraid of the rejection that they can't make their feelings known. What is fear? But then you can say, okay, overcome your fear of rejection. What on earth does it look like? It doesn't look like rejection. What it looks like is these thoughts. This is how a fear of rejection actually manifests. And you're not going to know how to catch it or overcome it. It's like invisible, right? So you got to use some kind of detection. We need like sonar. That's where these exercises come in. Because you're going to know what kind of thoughts to look out for. And when they pop up in your head, you're going to be like, oh, there's my insecurity. It's not truth. It's just there's a part of me that feels this way about myself. And when I said this right here is money, unless you do this exercise, this is what your mind is going to tell you. But if your mind tells you this instead, there's room to move there. There's hope in this second statement. There's no hope in the first statement. There's plenty of hope in the second statement. Do y'all get the difference there? That's why it's important to do this internal work. And once you do that internal work, when you want to make your intentions known, all of these thoughts and feelings are going to come up, but this time you're ready for them. You're going to be like, yeah, all that stuff could be true. Could be. Maybe I'll get rejected. But you know what? I got to make up for not dating in college, so we're going to get some XP either way. So acknowledge those thoughts. Maybe do a quick breathing practice, right? So you can do like, find the space between inhalation and exhalation. Do something for 60, 90, 120 seconds. Put yourself in a calm frame of mind, right? Maybe meditate it out a little bit. And then ask them out. Last tip. Ask yourself, how can I be more patient with myself. So I can say be more patient, right? But like, how do you do that? So instead, how can I be more patient? What can you do to be more patient with yourself? Got to answer that question. What I can do to be more patient with myself is ask this person out and acknowledge. I mean, this is just a sample answer. You have to come up with your own. Okay? No cheating. I got to ask. What can I do to be more patient with myself? Well, like, I can ask this person out, and if it doesn't work out and I don't get laid and I don't live happily ever after, I can be okay with myself. I can be more patient with myself. I can acknowledge that I missed these opportunities, right? I went down this path instead of going down this path, and it's going to take me some time to get back. So I can ask this person out and I can get rejected, and I'm going to be patient with myself that I'll do better next time. So people say be more patient, but like how? So that's something you've got to ask yourself. Can you give yourself a pass if things don't work out? Make sense? So the basic issue with being a virgin is that in life we have milestones, right? Like we start dating at a particular age, we get laid by a particular age. There's certain milestones. And what happens is as we miss those milestones, we start to lack faith in ourselves. We start to become insecure about ourselves. As we become insecure about ourselves, it becomes easier to miss further milestones. This is the virginity trap. Since I'm insecure and I haven't gotten laid in high school, when I go to college or uni, now I can't get laid there because I'm a virgin and I don't know how it works. And so then I don't get laid in college, and now I don't know how to date, and now I feel more insecure. So the more you miss milestones, the more insecure you feel. The more insecure you feel, the easier it is to miss milestones, and the harder it is to catch up. This is your situation. Now, there are solutions, right? There's got to be some way to fix this. And so then people will offer you two solutions. They'll say, fix your shame, work on yourself, become confident in yourself. Just fix all of those things. Work on the shame and insecurities. You need to go to therapy. Like, that's great. Honestly, it is. I'm not saying that sarcastically, but you can go to therapy for a year, and it's not like people are going to be lining up outside your door to have sex with you at the end of that. At least maybe I'm not good enough of a therapist to be able to get my patients to do that. I don't know. I don't think that's a reasonable outcome. Right? So like, we'll deal with the shame, or there are the people, hey, I will teach you 5 techniques to guarantee we're going to use neurolinguistic programming, and I'm going to teach you biopsycho hacks to get you laid. When you want to talking to a girl and she goes like this, you go like this, you mirror her, and then she will get laid. That's how it works. I'm going to teach you the secrets, only $59.99. Sign up now with discount, and I'll teach you the secrets of getting laid. And so people will teach you techniques, right? There are like some techniques, like SMILE, like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. But the problem is when you try to go do that, when people give you advice about the practicalities of it, if you're carrying around that ball of shame, then like you can't do those things because the shame is going to like bleed into everything else. People say, oh, you need to socialize more. But when I socialize more and I have all these thoughts about how I'm a loser, like that's not going to work well, right? Because the advice works for those people because they're playing with a different set of cards. Like that's the basic issue. Is that if people are socially, if they hit all those milestones, the hand of cards they're playing with the stats on their character sheet are different from your stats. And the advice doesn't apply to you because your stats are different. Your level is different. So what you've got to do is deal with both of these problems at the same time. It's a synergistic approach, and an acknowledgement that there's an internal emotional component that when you try to move out into the world is going to influence your thoughts and behaviors. You have to understand what that internal emotional component is and catch it in the act. And I know people are going to be like listening to this and wondering, okay, how do I fix it? I know this sounds absolutely insane. You don't have to fix it. All you need to do is be aware of it. Awareness precedes control. Like literally when I'm working with patients who struggle with this kind of thing, or even working in a professional standpoint or doing consulting, all you have to do is teach human beings what the playing field looks like and how to navigate, and then your mind and body will take over on its own. As you catch the thought, all people suck. No, that's not true. All people suck some of the time. People are allowed to have bad days. As you catch that thought and you shift in your mind for a fraction of a second, your attitude will change at the party. People will be more open to you. And that's the tricky thing, is success in a relationship or getting laid is not like A to Z list of steps, right? It's about shifting your attitude. It's about confidence. And like, the thing is, all of those abstract things we can't operationalize into like 15 steps to become confident. And so how does that attitude shift happen? It happens internally. And it starts with the awareness of thoughts. So if you're a virgin, and however old you are, and I'm sure there are people who are watching this who are 40-year-old virgins and people who are watching this who are 14-year-old virgins, and you all feel the same. It's not about the age. But there is a component of missed milestones which we have to acknowledge. And so intentionally, you have to go out into those social situations, but combine the internal work with social intention, and then slowly start to level up. Is this going to work for you? I honestly don't know. Worked for me, but I can't say. Your mileage may vary. But what I can say with a lot of confidence is that this is the most consistent thing that I have found that works with the most people. The rest of it is up to you. Questions? Seiko 5 is saying, but you're married. So I don't know, are you saying that did work for me or didn't work for me? Alexandra Fern, what if you're incredibly picky with people you're attracted to? I don't think that I think that's fine. Like, I think that's, if you're picky, you're picky, right? So all that means is that if you want to try to form a relationship, then you just need to increase the scale of who you meet. So if you're attracted to 3 out of 10 people versus 1 out of 10 people, all that means is that you're going to have to, to have an opportunity with 10 people, you've got to have 33 exposures, or you've got to have 100, right? That's the only difference it makes. There is another thing to consider, which is to understand why you're attracted to the people that you're attracted to, and whether there's some work to be done there. So whether there is some kind of like, if you're attracted to traits that are not good for you in some particular way, or there's some flexibility there, like learning to appreciate different kinds of people, like there could be some work there, but okay. But if I'm catching thoughts within myself, how can I listen to another party? It's a good question. Tumata for Faka. It's hard, right? But if you really pay attention to the way that you converse with people, we're not usually always paying attention to the other person. We can spend a little bit of time with ourselves. Like usually like your mind wanders when you're in a conversation a little bit. The other thing is that you don't have to do this while you're in conversation. So what I would do is like, when I'm walking over, so I remember going through this process in college where like I made an intent, I decided I was going to try to be more social, and like I would leave the room, right? So I would say like, okay, I didn't want to go to the party, didn't want to go to the party, didn't want to go to the party. And what I realized is that I could mentally reset by taking a shower. So I'd take a shower and then I'd get dressed for the party. And then like, if I could do that, then I could get out the door. As I'm walking over to the party, all kinds of anxieties are going through my head. What about this? 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 And then like, you just process those, like acknowledge what you're feeling in those moments at the party. Like, okay, this is going to be scary, things like that. And then there may even be certain things that you can reassure yourself with, right? Which is that I'm going to go to the party, but I don't have to stay for 4 hours. I'm going to try to have a good time for half an hour or 1 hour. If I'm not feeling it, I can always come home and play Diablo. Right? So, but I'm going to stay for at least half an hour or 1 hour. Right? So I'd promise myself half an hour, but I'd really shoot for 1 hour. Okay, we're going to do minimum of half an hour, but if we can hit 1 hour, like that's an accomplishment. And then I'd go, and then I'd be like intentional about talking to people, and what do you know? Time would fly by. Oh, 2 hours has gone by. Great. Right? Yeah. John Export is asking, what do you do when you lost your virginity and still have those problems? I love that you asked that question. So here's the thing that a lot of the virgins don't know, is that, I know it's going to sound crazy, getting laid ain't going to fix all the problems. It's not like busting a nut makes all the internal shame go away. It's like, boom, magic eraser for all the shame and insecurity in your life. Shockingly, as a psychiatrist, in my professional opinion, sometimes getting laid makes the problem worse. Because here you were thinking that it would fix everything. And it doesn't fix everything. And then you get into this weird cycle. Okay, now I've gotten laid, but I still feel empty inside. And then you can but there's some kind of oxytocin, there's some kind of connection, there's some kind of intimacy. And then you start, even this has happened, I've seen this happen, where sometimes you will become, I'm thinking of it, you will become, and this is not a gender specific term, you'll become a slut. You can become a man slut, woman slut. And then you'll start having sexual engagements to try to assuage your internal insecurities. And it won't work because it doesn't work like that. And you'll start to lean into sex as a substitute for emotional needs and emotional work. And then that's a whole other can of worms. And then if you're out there and you're listening to this as a virgin, it's like, yeah, give me that can of worms. Way better than the can of worms I got. I'm not trying to shame them. By all means, apologies if I did that. I'm not saying that it's bad to sleep with a lot of people. I'm not making a value judgment on that. What I'm saying is that using sex and a prolific amount of sex, when having sex once doesn't fix your emotional security, sometimes what happens is people will try more, right? Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And the more that you try to do it to try to fix those internal emotional needs, so I've seen this in patients who have sex addictions. I'm not shaming them for having sex. That's not my intention. If I did, I apologize. What I'm saying is that it doesn't fix the problem, which is what's really shocking to the people who haven't had sex. I'm just saying, it ain't going to fix it. I just don't know how to say this. If you have years of emotional insecurity and shame and feeling like you're unlovable, an orgasm is not going to fix that. I honestly, in terms of the word, hopefully it's okay to use that word, the S word. I honestly, I don't know if y'all noticed, I paused for a second and tried to think of a word that describes someone who has a lot of sex that wasn't that word. I couldn't think of one. Promiscuous, but that's an adjective. I guess I should have said, people will become promiscuous. No, but I mean, I understand that y'all are trolling, but you guys do realize that sometimes I'll go to places and give lectures at universities. And it's such a charged word, I need a better word. Really, I need a better word. Can y'all help me with that? Is there a word? But see, to say that they're addicts is not appropriate at that point. That's the problem. It's not clear whether they have an addiction. I don't know. Okay, so it seems like y'all can't Casanova. Okay, y'all can't come up with something either. So maybe we'll check a. Yeah, that's what I was. So Giga V9 is saying serial sex haver. I'll use that, I guess. That certainly rolls off the tongue. Yeah, maybe I can say they can become hypersexual. That's probably better. Thank you, chat. Jaren grinders. They become grinders. Okay. Help? Questions? Is it okay that we talked about this? It ain't your fault that you're a virgin. It's okay to be a virgin. Ain't no problem with it. We're all born virgins. And it's hard because you'll get advice from some people that don't understand the internal struggles, and you'll get people who will try to fix the internal struggles, but fixing the internal struggles doesn't actually substitute for the lack of social milestones. So you got to do both. And it's tough because very few people understand that. K1 Neko saying entitlement is part of the framework you presented. So in general, I don't really know. I feel like I need to understand more about digging into entitlement. So I just don't think it's a useful approach to think about entitlement. I personally don't think it's useful. So like if this is a challenge that people face, this is one of the areas where there may be systemic issues at play, but I don't think raging about the systemic issues is nearly as effective as doing internal personal work. Now, this is a bias that I have, and the bias is strong in terms of my choices and the approach that I take, right? Like I studied for several years to become a monk, and like that's like not trying to fix a systemic issue. Like I remember a very good friend of mine was an activist, and so like we had different approaches to our dharma. His approach was like, I'm going to try to like help the world. And I was like, I'm going to try to help myself. So he had a population-based approach. I had a very personal approach. Then I went to medical school, and instead of becoming primarily a researcher who does research studies on tons of people, I became a clinician because I like to work with individuals. So my bias is towards the individual as both the problem and the solution. Now, I acknowledge there are all kinds of societal impacts on that, but I think that, like, you know, if there's some kind of inequality, should you advocate for equality? Sure. But I don't think that when it comes to sexuality, entitlement is a very, like, useful framework to accomplish goals, personally. I'm just saying that's my perspective. Very well said. Wendy's Lost Boys said, raging about things I can't change fixes nothing for me. It only makes me feel strong while doing nothing. Beautiful. Beautifully said. That's been my experience as well. You growing the hair way out this time? Just haven't had time for a haircut and can't find a decent barber. That's the challenge, chat. Okay. All right. So all right, let's do one more. We've got to do one more thing. So let's take a quick look, okay? What about? Okay. All right. Let's take a look at one more thing. All right. I struggle with shame. How will coaching help? Hi, using a throwaway because other people know my real account. I've been in the Discord for a while and attended an Ask a Coach event on shame that was interesting. I also watched a Dr. K video on shame, and I liked the explanation of how shame is the gap between my current self and my ideal self. He also mentioned that coaching can help with this, but I don't understand how talking to another person will reduce the gap. It doesn't make any sense in my head. It just feels like I will never live up to my full potential. Also, is this the right place and time for this question? Okay, let's talk about shame. So the first thing that we're going to do is talk a little bit about what shame is. So if I had to encapsulate it, I would say that shame is the gap between where you are and where you ideally should be. So there's like an ideal self that we all have in our mind, right? I'm someone who works out. I'm someone who eats healthy. I'm someone who wakes up on time. I'm someone who doesn't waste all my weekends in front of a screen and doom scrolling. There's this person that we know we can be, right? Because technically, like, I have the power to do that. So oftentimes the ideal self that I'm talking about is not like a fictitious self. It's not like I can fly to the moon or I can, fly to the sun. Like, the ideal self that we have are all the things that we know we can do. And oftentimes those are the things that we have done in the past, right? Because there have been weekends where I've stayed completely away from my phone. There have been times where I've woken up early and started studying and gotten ahead in a class. I have gotten an A on a test. So we know we're capable of it. And there's this ideal self that we build for, which is all of the things that we've done in the past, which if we put them all together, we have this potential to be this version of ourselves. There's that person over there, and then there's where I am. And the gap between these two things is where shame lives, right? Because I'm not living up to my potential. So now the question is, if this is true, like, what do we do about that, right? How do we approach this problem? Because the challenge with shame is that, once again, if I'm ashamed of myself and I try to do something, sometimes that shame can really create problems for me. So let's say I wake up on a Saturday morning and I end up studying for 4 hours. If I'm carrying that shame with myself, something really subtle can happen. Instead of being proud of my achievement, I can beat myself up for it. And I can say, oh my God, I should have been doing this all along. Oh my God, why did I only study for 4 hours? I really should have done 8. Right? I should have been doing this all along. And I'll even be resentful, because here's the problem with the shame gap. Here's the ideal self. Here's where I am. Even if we do this, we still fall short of our goal. So something really bizarre happens where progress isn't enough. Progress doesn't actually lead to positive reinforcement. All progress does is make it clear how much more I have to go. And so even though I'm moving in the right direction, I don't receive positive reinforcement from it. And that's because of the shame that I carry with me. Now, some people may be wondering a little bit, because this person was asking about coaching, right? So, because it's a good point that the person brings up, which is that, like, if I carry shame, I don't understand how talking to a different person will fix this problem, because this is what I'm capable of. And if I'm over here, talking about how I'm over here doesn't actually move me towards my goal, right? Like, it doesn't actually move me towards my goal. So here are a couple of things to understand. The first is that when I have an ideal self and I literally make progress, this is not a positive reinforcer, right? Because I have this gap left. The gap is still there. So what do I need to do? I need to find some way to get rid of this thing. Because if I can start over here and I move this far, then this is progress. This is like, hey, I accomplished something today. And tomorrow I can do this, and tomorrow I can do this, and tomorrow I can do this. So this is where, when we think a little bit about how coaching works, coaches are going to help you all do a couple of things. The first is to understand where the idealistic expectation came from. Because as long as that idealistic expectation is there, it's going to be so hard to live up to it, right? And that idealistic expectation is built up from all of these different experiences that leave an emotional impact. When I get a B and I could have gotten an A, that hurts, and I feel a little bit ashamed of myself, right? When my older brother or sister, they got a 4.0, but I only got a 3.2. And when my parents compared me to the older child, that makes me feel ashamed. Or even more devastating in that, when I used to get a 4.0, when I was a gifted kid and I was in the honors program and I got a scholarship to go to college because I was in the top 10 in my class, and now I'm struggling. So the ideal self, as long as that exists, it's going to be hard to sort of fix that shame gap. So how do we approach that in coaching? We start by understanding that that ideal self is built up from a series of fantasies. And as you go through past experiences of your life and you start to realize where does that ideal self come from, and you start to unpack it, you begin to realize that some of the ways that you were judging yourself were actually unfair, right? So like maybe you had ADHD and your older sibling didn't. You start to realize that because you were so intelligent, you never developed good study habits. So you have the classic pattern of a gifted kid, which is number 1, straight to number 15, right? You're doing fine, you're doing fine, you're doing fine. You hit a wall, and then you go straight to like non-functional because now your IQ can't keep up. It's not sufficient, and you haven't built the appropriate skills. So as you work with a coach, like this is what they try to do, is try to help you reframe things to understand why things happened. And once you understand why things happened, hopefully you can be a little bit more non-judgmental towards yourself. And that's where, like, how do I learn how to be non-judgmental? The way that you learn how to be non-judgmental is someone else treats you non-judgmentally. So this is also something really simple to understand. Where does the negative self-talk in your head come from? It comes from the outside. That's where it starts, right? So when you have kids that are browbeaten by parents, nagged by parents, always making comparisons to your older, brighter, stronger, faster, more charismatic sibling. When they always make those comparisons, you learn that. In the same way that you learn slang and you learn the language that you speak at home. You learn that kind of self-talk because other people speak to you that way. So if you look at some of these relationships like therapy or coaching or even intimate friendships, intimate romantic partners, as people start treating you different, mentors, mentees, as people start treating you non-judgmentally, you will learn how to look at yourself non-judgmentally. And by going through your life historically and sort of recognizing how your shame built up over time, as we start to rewrite that history, reinterpret those events, the shame will start to decrease. The idealistic self will start to decrease. As the idealistic self starts to decrease, the shame decreases with it because it's the gap between these two things. The next thing is that coaching is really not outcome oriented, but it's like action oriented. It's not just about fixing shame. If your primary concerns are clinical in nature or it's just to deal with emotions, I would say like therapy may be more appropriate. What coaching is really about is the application of that internal work towards external things. That's what I really think coaching is specialized for. So now the question is, if you want to apply for a job, if you want to apply for a promotion, if you want to ask someone out, that shame is going to interfere with that behavior. An understanding of that in the present moment. What is the shame dictating in my mind? What is it telling me to do? What is it not telling me to do? As those emotions arise in your mind, that creates resistance to action. As we have resistance to action, it becomes hard to act. And so we feel paralyzed. We start to feel tired. We start to feel directionless, etc. So the key thing about coaching is it also has a very present focus. Okay, what are your goals and what gets in the way? How does shame interfere with it? As we start to understand those things and as we start to emotionally decompress whatever fuels your resistance, then the resistance gets lower and it's actually easier to act. And so you can sort of fix the shame, but then it's also about how the shame interferes in your life. And it's about targeting that particular interaction. And once we can target the shame as it interferes in the other parts of your life, as we reduce that, then hopefully your life starts to move in the right direction. So we have an IRB-approved study that's running right now We presented a study that had 1,300 participants at the American Psychiatric Association in our coaching program. So what we've found now is that people who are in coaching for 4 months or 5 months see a 58% increase in their sense of life purpose. So people come in directionless, 58% increase in life purpose. We see 25 to 35% reductions in depression and anxiety. Now, this is not a clinical intervention, so how could it possibly reduce depression or anxiety? And it turns out that as you start building a life, as you start finding purpose, and you start moving forward in a positive direction, the negative emotions start to improve. So we're not there to treat depression or anxiety. Let me make this very clear. We're there to help you build a life. And as you build a life, the negative emotions start to get better. And that's a statistically significant finding. So how does coaching help with shame? That's how I'd lay it out, right? It's not just about fixing the shame. It's about an application of understanding how shame affects your behaviors, understanding how shame affects your mind. It's about digging into those things and reframing them, trying to understand where this shame came from. It's even about decompressing the emotion in the moment so that you can take the actions that you want to, so that resistance is not too much to deal with. And hopefully that'll help, right? Your mileage may vary, but at this point we feel really confident based on IRB-approved studies and initial outcomes data that these are pretty consistent findings. And that if you really want to put together your life, you have to have a sense of purpose. And once you have that North Star, then other problems become easier to deal with, right? Where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's a goal that you're kind of moving towards on a daily basis, it makes all the other things kind of fall into place and becomes easier to tackle. And that's what we really try to do at HG Coaching. Questions? Oh, a lot of good questions. Okay. So how's life purpose measured? Great question. So we measure life purpose based on, I think, an NIH patient-reported promise scale. So the National Institutes of Health in the United States developed standardized public domain scales. So this is developed by the NIH. They said, this is the scale that we're going to use. It's not owned by anyone. It's not used for a particular purpose. So some scales, for example, are developed by pharmaceutical companies. Newsflash, sometimes when a pharma company develops a scale, it is developed in a particular way to be optimized for their medications. So this is developed by the NIH, and it's kind of like the gold standard, at least in my opinion, of scales because there's no bias in it. So we use standardized outcome reporting measures. How do you estimate the percent of depression reduction? Great question. So that's a subjective report also by a promise scale. So there's like a standardized scale that we can use to measure how depressed someone is. These are scientifically validated. Does longitudinal prove to be more effective? Great question, Topless Orange. Up to a point is what I would say. So some people get a lot of benefit in a short amount of time. Some people get more benefit over longer periods of time. But it does appear that overall, the longer you're with it, the more it helps. There are a couple of other very important caveats to that data. One is that sometimes people accomplish a lot in a short time and then they're done. So we actually don't have long-term data on like a lot of success stories. So the most common reason that people leave coaching is they accomplish their goals. Number one reason to stop coaching. And so, you know, like it basically like it, for some people it takes longer to get there. For some people they get there faster, but it's not necessarily like more is better, if that makes sense. Other questions? So do I have links to the studies that you talk about during stream? I would love to read them. So if y'all want links, so a lot of the stuff that we, so I have 3 ways to answer that question. The first is not always, but for example, if y'all want to learn about attachment theory, you can get a book on attachment theory. So I recently got, let me see if I can find it. This book is great on attachment theory, right? So I don't know how to say this, but when I like teach stuff, I read this. And this is not one study. I mean, this is like, this is a textbook. So this probably has hundreds of citations. Second thing is, if y'all want citations, Dr. K's guide has a ton of them. So that's where we do try to very exhaustively offer a targeted bibliography to the concepts that we share. So that's the best place to find a bibliography. Third thing is the data that I'm citing now is not published. It's from an IRB approved study that we're preparing for publication. So it's pre-publication data. Although it has been presented, so vetted in some way by the APA, because they have to, look at our data and decide whether it's okay to preliminary present. At conferences, you frequently will have pre-publication data that's presented. So if you're asking about us, like our data. Good question, though. Book name? Handbook of Attachment. It is called the handbook because it barely fits in the hand. Couple of other things, if people are curious. So just other outcomes, 16 weeks of group coaching. Also experienced 58. Oh, okay, so it looks like I got some numbers wrong. So personal coachings, we see a 35 to 45% reduction in anxiety. In group coaching is 27 to 35%. And in career coaching at 8 weeks, people see 25 to 35% reductions in depression and anxiety and a 25% increase in confidence in the trajectory of their career. That's at 8 weeks. So for career coaching, we don't have quite as much longitudinal data. It's also been smaller. So we don't have our sample size for our APA presentation was 1,300. We don't have that many people who've gone through career coaching. So we seems like people are 25% more confident in their career trajectory. Jay Naxo, have I made a video about what is purpose? I think so. You can check our YouTube channel, but we talk a lot about purpose in Dr. K's guide. I think especially the depression guide or the meditation guide. So I think that a lot of what may be getting misdiagnosed as depression is actually a lack of purpose in life. Bunzo1 is asking, have you read the book Attached, The New Science of Adult Attachment and How It Can Help You Find and Keep Love? No, I have not. So I've heard good things about the book, but I generally speaking read primary textbooks or papers as opposed to pop science books that are targeted at the lay audience. I'm not saying that the book isn't great, but I like to get as close to the primary data as I can. So what I tend to find about a lot of the pop science books is they're fantastic. Don't get me wrong. But that I oftentimes am not satisfied with the data that they present. It's usually a lot more anecdotal, right? It'll be lots of stories, which is fine. The audience is different. Mullet Offlane is saying, giving someone career coaching, it's a boost, and of course people start to believe in themselves. They would get a higher boost if you put in $5,000 in their account. My point being that people are delusional and can be swayed in different ways. I don't know what you base that on. Mullet Offlane, love the name, by the way. I actually don't know that they would... I actually don't know how you make that claim, that if you just gave someone a cash infusion, they would feel more confident about their career trajectory. That, in fact, I would actually think that would have very little impact. They may reduce their stress, may provide a sense of financial security, but what we're talking about is career trajectory, confidence in where your career is going that's built up over time. I don't know that a one-time cash infusion would make people feel more confident. It's an interesting point. I'm just really curious what you base that on. Is lack of purpose associated with lack of motivation or excitement? I would absolutely think so. That too is not, I'm trying to think about whether I've actually seen a study that uses a validated measure of motivation, excitement, and a validated measure of purpose, and whether those two things are correlated. I can't think of one. Seems like simple, right? That the answer would be yes, but I don't know. So does your new ADHD module have insights on inattentive ADHD types? So this is a great question. So this may sound kind of weird, but in the ADHD module, we don't focus on the separate subtypes of ADHD, and there's a reason for that. So if you look at the subtypes of ADHD, right, there's inattentive type, there's hyperactive, there's ADD, hyperactivity. There's even hypotheses of an emotionally dysregulated subtype. So my experience working as a clinician with ADHD is even if you get diagnosed with a particular subtype, there's a lot of variance within that subtype. So inattentive may have more of a social element versus like a professional element. So some people will have like a bad inattention in their professional life, but be totally fine in their social life, or vice versa. So instead, what we do is rather than focusing on sort of the DSM subtypes, what we focus on is the neuroscience circuits. So what are all of the ways in which ADHD impacts or ADD impacts your brain? What are the different neuroscientific circuits? How does it affect your emotional regulation? How does it affect your attention? How does it affect executive function like planning and executing action? And so my experience has been that when you take a more comprehensive neuroscience approach and you understand, okay, what are all the ways in which my brain is like being impacted by this? That's when you can really figure out a tailored strategy to understanding yourself. And as a clinician, that's kind of the approach that I take, if that makes sense. Right? It's not a substitute for clinical treatment by any means, but what it is an insight into how I think about patients, which I think is absolutely like educational, which even patients should think about themselves this way. To your knowledge, can repeated medication inefficacy indicate a misdiagnosis of ADHD? Sure. Right? So not commenting on your particular case, but a general principle of medicine is if the treatment doesn't work or 5 treatments don't work, then reconsider the diagnosis. That's like diagnostic logic 101. Thank you, Topless Orange, for answering North Star Warriors questions. So this is important to understand. So when we started streaming, a lot of people wanted to work with Dr. K. And while I'm flattered by that, what I really found was like, I just can't do it, like physically. I don't have enough hours in the day. I would love to work with each and every one of you individually. And I'm not just saying that, I genuinely mean it. Like, I love doing individual work. Love it. It's like one of my favorite things to do. The challenge is that there just isn't enough time, fundamentally. So then the question is like, okay, if I can't get to everyone, so I went to a friend of mine and I said, hey, I'm getting a bunch of referrals, like I'm not quite sure what to do about it. And they were joking and they were saying, yeah, well, like, you know, either you increase more hours in the day or you duplicate yourself. That's the only way that you can help these people. They were being facetious and they were saying, you basically can't help them. There's nothing you can do. But I got to thinking, and I was like, wait a minute. How special am I? And I actually believe I'm not that special. I think a lot of what I accomplish is not because, like, there's some special circuit in my brain that other human beings don't have. I think it's just because I was taught certain concepts and, like, have had certain kinds of training, right? So a couple of years of meditation training, medical school, psychiatry residency, clinical work, and also a lot of stuff that isn't clinical work. So I myself struggled with playing too many games, and I hung out with a lot of gamers. And so then the question became, can I actually teach what I do to people? And so then was kind of thinking about, so I did one of the first things that I did is put together a continuing medical education course for the American Psychiatric Association on video game addiction, which you all can sign up for and watch if you want to. I also started teaching stuff at Harvard Medical School. So like started teaching stuff on technology addiction and stuff there. And so was trying to equip clinicians, but like ran into a slight problem, which is that the people, like psychiatry residents at HMS don't have like 50 hours to spend learning what I can teach. They've got to learn a bunch of other stuff, right? They have to learn about psychopharm. They have to learn about schizophrenia. They have to learn about TMS and ECT. And I don't think that my knowledge is more valuable than theirs. I don't think it's a good idea to have Dr. K teaching there for 50 hours. It's not appropriate. There's way more important stuff for them to learn. But for our particular population, there are things that I think are applicable. And that's like literally why we started a coaching program. Everything that we do at HG is designed based on the needs of the community, literally. So the question is, can I teach people what I do? Now, are they duplicates of me? Of course not. But I think we can teach them enough. And that's what the data shows. So we started a pilot. We took, I think, like 8 or 10 people from the community, and I shared some concepts, and they started working with some clients, and like we did pilot studies, right? So we started with a pilot study. Didn't charge anything or anything like that. Let's just see if this works. And then since that time, we've gone through 6 or 7 curriculum revisions. As we collect data, as we ask people what worked for you, what didn't work for you, we get better globally. And then we disseminate that out and we modify our curriculum. And I think part of the reason that we get the outcomes that we get is because we really incorporate data, analytics, and feedback into curriculum advancements. So like in a weird way, I mean, all of our coaches are fantastic, but like the ones that are trained later, I think have a more refined curriculum, which the older coaches have access to as well, but so they can rewatch stuff. And so, but basically a lot of the refinements come from actually the older coaches. When the older coaches will say, hey, I've seen like 15 people who struggle with this, like, let's talk about it. And then we figure things out. So we try to stay adaptive and responsive to the community. Do you do follow-ups to track the long-term effects of coaching, Simeon? Great question. Not yet is the answer. At least not that I'm aware of. Yes, dude, is asking, how can we make your lessons and perspectives available broadly in general school education rather than having to stumble upon it by misclicking on an Asmongold stream? Yes, dude, your guess is as good as mine. If anyone out there has I saw a really great post like a couple months ago about a teacher who like synthesized one of our workshops and taught it to a group of their fellow teachers. And they were like, this is really, really helpful. Like we were talking about gifted kids and stuff like that. Like why kids like behave the way that they do. I don't remember the details of what they taught, but like I said earlier, I think that health education and understanding your mind should be a basic part of education. So this was true in ancient India, where like learning yoga and meditation was a part of school. In fact, school was taught at monasteries. So you learned like science and music and like how to meditate and about emotions and sense organs and all this kind of stuff. So this is where I hate to break it to you, yes, dude, but I don't have all the answers and we're not all geniuses over here. This is where if y'all have a suggestion for making, and the suggestion is like, y'all should do this. Like that helps only so much, right? So the more operationalized it is, or if anyone knows people who work on educational curriculums, let us know. Because we'd love to make this a part of standard education. We've gotten some interest from teachers here and there, but like it's a system. And I don't know how to say, I don't have any magical power to like wave something and go talk to a superintendent of a school district. Okay, we got to raid because we're way past time. Okay. I see a lot of people have questions about coaching. That's good. Yeah, but to who? Loblo Hall. I appreciate the suggestion, but like, who do I make a petition to? What is it? Josh Strife Hayes. Did we? Okay, we can. Josh Strife Hayes, okay? Okay, yeah, so thank you so much. Tech Teller saying we are, what we're gonna, okay, so we're gonna raid Josh Strife Hayes. And what we're gonna do is Tech Teller saying if you guys have more questions about coaching, we have Ask a Coach this Friday on Discord. So that's why we have these kinds of events. I think people really enjoy it. I think there were like 200 people there last time. And so just try to get a sense of what coaching is by going there and ask questions. So last one was really cool. Take care, everybody. We'll see y'all on Friday.